Jordan Peterson, you're just wrong about this one. In Jordan Peterson's video that we'll show in a few moments, he talks about the belief that he just doesn't see how Russia can lose this war. Well, I think that at the end of the day, this is really a battle about ideas. You know, the Russian ideas are about oligarchy and power. They care little about civil rights or human rights. And long term, they've done extreme damage to their economy because of it. In Western powers, we're about the idea of the rule of law and free elections and people being able to determine their own destiny. We're about civil rights and equal rights and human rights. We put the individual at the center. And at the end, it is our ideas that are stronger than theirs. We don't have to beat Russia here. This is like the Cold War. All we have to do is contain them. And if we're able to contain them for long enough, they'll fall on their own weight. But in any event, you can listen to Jordan Peterson's video and have him kind of describe for himself and for you what it is that he thinks is important. And I'll give my comments after.
I cannot see how we can defeat the Russians in any real sense, because they will not allow themselves to lose, because the consequences even of an overwhelming military victory for our side will be internationally disastrous. And finally, because the quarrel that lies at one part of the bottom of this war will not disappear at all and may even worsen if the Russians somehow lose. With regard to that final point, the war of ideas that has given rise to the current real war will continue its destructive and nihilistic progress, even if the Russians capitulate and agree to the reestablishment of the pre-invasion boundaries. It is not obvious that while that war of ideas continues, that the Russians will even allow a prosperous Ukraine allied more closely with the West on their border. And it's wishful thinking to imagine that this war will end with the ignominious departure of a Putin in disgrace. Not only is he popular, but he is arguably much less terrible than almost any leader that has preceded him for a century in Russia. That may be damning with faint praise, but it's something necessary to understand in relationship to the promulgation of any naive and foolish optimism.
This is the truth. We don't know how this war will end. We do know where we've been, and we know where we are. Russia is fighting the same war it has fought for centuries. It's a war of attrition. They have poor logistics, bad supply lines, old equipment, but they are willing to put hundreds of thousands of their people into a meat grinder. They appear to have no real concern about how many people they lose or what atrocities they commit. They obviously feel that from a number standpoint, Ukraine can't win. Now the Ukrainians, they've defied expectations and have won up until this point, assuming that winning was denying Russia their maximalist aims. Russia does not control Kiev, and they didn't win in a week, both of which were their goals. If we're honest, depending upon how you define victory, it's still Russia's war to lose. They have a lot more people, but it's hard to account for the fortitude of Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have showed their willingness to resist the Russians when they were vastly outnumbered and outarmed. This caused the world to arm them with the best military equipment available on the planet. Stingers, javelins, tanks. It now looks like S-16s are in the offering. In the face of losing almost everything, unbelievable civilian bombings, loss of power, loss of food, they still show incredible resolve. Sometimes, when someone takes everything from you, all you have left is the will to fight. Now, the war could end with a clear winner, and one side surrenders. It could end with one clear winner, and the other side decides to fight guerrilla style, undermining Russia for decades. But it's also possible that the two sides get bogged down. They fight a long, slow war of attrition. Here, the winner is either the side that outlasts the other in willpower, or one wins because they outproduce the other side. In World War II, the Germans gained an early advantage because the rest of the world underestimated their aims. And as they took territory, they used stolen revenue to produce more planes and tanks than the rest of the world. But after the U.S. was forced into the war, we became a machine in military production. We far outproduced them in armament, tanks, bombs, and planes. We won the war of attrition. Today, in terms of military equipment, Ukrainians produce nothing. The hundreds of billions of dollars given to them, as I said earlier, was stored goods from us and our allies around the world. Those goods are not being reproduced. As much as Jordan Peterson fears the industrial military complex, I fear its ability to reproduce what we used. The supply chains have been affected, and they have no long-term guarantee of buyers if they ramp back up. If we are to win this war, or if we lose this one and hope to win the next one, we have to replace that stock, and we need to do it fast. We must come from a position of strength. Jordan Peterson asks, what does an Allied victory look like? He believes that Putin, backed into a corner, would use a tactical nuclear option. He believes that regime change might result in something worse. Both of these may very well be true. Look, I said before, Jordan is a smart guy. But there are very smart guys working for our military and in our intelligence services. And there is nothing Jordan said that wasn't obvious to them. However, the question that he failed to ask, the more important question, was this: what does an Allied failure look like? What happens if Putin wins a clear victory? If Western liberal democracies give in because of the threat of using nukes? That question is very important. We're very fortunate that the efforts of the Ukrainians and our NATO allies have already stopped the option of a clear win. His goal again was take Kiev quickly, and that horse is out of the barn a year ago. He has lost much. NATO's expanded, Western liberal democracies are more united. He is an international pariah, other than to China, and if he's not careful, he's simply going to be a puppet dictator. Yet Russia taking over all of Ukraine still poses great risk to us. Someone who will threaten the use of nukes won't stop doing it because he secured Ukraine. He will begin to refortify, restock his failing supplies, think about what he did wrong in Ukraine, and he will attack again. And again he'll threaten nukes. Convinced of Western weaknesses, he may actually use them. As we said, if we give in to Putin because of our fear of nukes, do we give in to him in Romania, Lithuania, Poland? Look, there are allies of Putin, including the chairman of the State Duma, that said if the West does not return their assets, that they should take other territory in response, including Alaska. So do we surrender Alaska if he threatens nukes? Look, sooner or later we're going to have to stand up. You just can't escape this one. Put an asterisk on this point. It's our weakness that will make him more inclined to use a nuclear option than our strength. Yes, imagine for a moment the question of what happens if he wins. Certainly, I don't know any more about what happens if he wins, and Peterson can know about what happens if he loses. But if this is a game of reading crystal balls, we can look at this and make some educated guesses. If we give in, if we stop funding the war, or if the coalition breaks up, or if Ukraine just runs out of steam and Russia takes their maximalist aims, including Kiev, Putin's going to see us as weak. He'll regret his concessions. He will, over time, become more enraged at our support of Ukraine, and he'll blame us for the atrocities. He'll be emboldened at home. And at that victory party, he and Russian generals will believe that if we gave in on Ukraine, we'll give in again. If they win, there will be horrors unforetold in Ukraine. Mass executions of Ukrainians deemed traitors to the Russian people. There will be trials of war crimes, but it will be Ukrainians on trial. Women will become property. Children will become ignored or abused, and everything of worth will be taken out of the country as part of the spoils of war. Tyrants and oligarchs will be granted property, mineral rights, and given the right to buy indulgences. Now, how do we know all this will happen? Because it's already started. The torture and rape and theft from Ukrainians is documented. Territories the Russian took and lost have the evidence of rape, enslaved women, and mass executions. Entire families, including children, were shot in the back of the heads without trials. Public brutalities that we can't imagine in the U.S. And as other authoritarians see the weakness of the U.S. and Western democracies, they'll challenge us also. Countries who play the game between Western powers will begin to align with Russia and China. The balance of power will begin to tip. China has been hurt by demographics and a state-run economy. Their ambitions to world dominance is imploding. But if the Russians have an all-out victory, it will see the weakness of the U.S. and our allies. They'll join in the game of grabbing more territory, using imperialism to steal the wealth from others. They will know that if we push back, to just simply threaten the use of nukes. They'll take advantage of our weakness. And if all this happens, we'll look back and see the world order that we had was an age of enlightenment. That our order had done more to move humanity forward than any other order before. And we'll see it because those gains will begin to fade. The American world order, with the rule of law, will be replaced by a large part of the world under authoritarian hierarchy. Free markets and property rights will lose ground as authoritarianism and state-run economies are seen as the better option. And the period of enlightenment that we often overlook will begin to fade. Mankind and human progress will slow. Jordan asks, what does victory for us look like? Well, here's my shot. It starts with denying them the ability to have a clear win. If they do take Kiev, the penalty must be so high that Russians don't see it as an all-out victory. Their win has to be costly and not come because Western powers at long last were exhausted or frightened. We have taken the position that Ukraine gets to decide where victory lies. They too know their outcome is not assured. They have to weigh the risk and determine what they as a free people call victory. But we too are a free people, and we have the right to decide the level of our financial support. We cannot give our proxy to anyone. I am certain from those who I have spoken to that we have tremendous weight in the definition of victory. Now, Jordan's position is that we need to negotiate, and that may well be right. But all the intelligence says that right now, Putin's unwilling to find common ground. When he is ready, as distasteful as it will be, as terrible as the Russians have been, we need to think in terms about how each side can feel they won something. That is not a license to abandon the Ukrainians. It's just one to try to add some objectivity to the discussion. The Ukrainians have stated that victory is when they have pushed the Russians out of all Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. Certainly, I would love to see that. But I think it's fair to ask this question. Is winning the war and getting back all their territory, but not being admitted to the EU, a bigger win than letting them into the EU, but not getting back all their territory? My guess is admittance into the EU and into NATO is a much bigger win, and that leaves us with room for diplomacy. Putin declared on February 24th, 2022, that their goal was to demilitarize and denazify. This claim never added up. Russian state news agency, RIA Novosti, explained that denazification is inevitably also de-Ukrainianization, in effect, erasing the modern state of Ukraine. A month into the invasion and his retreat from Kiev, he changed his goal to the liberation of Donbass, broadly referring to Ukraine's two industrial regions in the east. After forced retreats from Kharkiv in the northeast and Attrition in the south, he has shown little success in achieving it. He annexed 4 areas that he did not have complete control over after his battlefront reverses. This really showed more weakness than strength. If Putin shows a willingness to negotiate, we should be at the table, if not actually preparing the table. Even though initial discussions itself can be seen as a weakness, it cannot be lost on Putin his military failures. Now those include his 35-mile armored convoy that was ground to a halt near Kiev, the retreat of 30,000 troops from Peterson, large numbers of deaths of new recruits here recently, and the sinking the battlecruiser Bakivka. If it is the right time to negotiate, it's not because of a nuclear threat. It's because the Ukrainians are in a position of strength. Russia's repeated threats to use nukes have gone unheeded, much to his surprise. He monitors the West politics and news carefully. He's hoping for a crack amongst the political elite. So far, regardless of the few who want to cut and run, he knows that we're resolved as well. I know there's chatter on the right, but I give Republicans a lot of credit. People like Mitch McConnell and the Republicans supporting him have shown complete support, regardless of any benefit that may go to the Democratic administration. They're adhering to the old guard narrative. It stops at the water's edge. This, more than anything, will bring Putin to the table with reasonable aims, and that is unity here at home. Certainly, weakness will not. To give Russia the benefit of a doubt, they believe they have legitimate security issues, and that's giving them the benefit of a doubt. In 2021, Putin demagogued on the rising military threat that NATO was creating on Russia's western border. I have to tell you, it strains credulity that Russia, with the largest arsenal and large army, is threatened by NATO. I see no evidence that the pacifist leaders of NATO have ever considered invading Russia. In fact, in 1997, Russia and NATO set up the Founding Act on Mutual Relations, Cooperation, and Security. The act reiterated that NATO had no intention, no plan, and no reason to place nuclear weapons in new states, nor did they see reason for permanent combat troops. From 1997 to 2014, NATO did not deploy any new combat forces. Now that changed when Russia used military force to seize Crimea. Washington and NATO, before the invasion, offered to engage further on reducing any security risks of Europe and Russia, as well as arms control. However, they would not agree to stop NATO's enlargement, and nor should they. Why should Russia be able to determine what other countries have in their involvement with NATO? And again, the idea that it threatens Russian security, I have grave doubts on. On the other hand, if Russia has large plans for expansion, to restore the old Soviet Union, then NATO's enlargement threatens those aims. The land bridge through the Donbass gives Russia connection to the ports in Crimea. Certainly we should worry about this aiding their military ambitions, but it also benefits them on trade. And this may be a fair trade-off with both countries if Ukraine is allowed into the EU. This, like the last Cold War, needs to be a process of containment, avoiding direct conflict. Unless they attack NATO, bowing our back when they try to expand, but always seeking peaceful resolution to disputes. The idea that Putin will be brought up on war crimes, I hate to say it, it's just wishful thinking. We have to abandon war crime tribunals to find peace. We can be certain that if we contain them, they have created an economic structure that with time will erode from within. Certainly, it'd be more powerful if Russia abandoned human rights violations of their own citizens, if they stopped murdering political dissidents, if they stopped giving the assets of Russian people away to oligarchs who give their tribute back to Putin, making him one of the wealthiest men on the planet. It would be nice if they'd stop trying to undermine free elections around the world or pay for the horrendous damage they inflicted in this war. Alas, this we realize is too much to expect from a tyrant. So let's allow time, their internal corruption, their extractive policies of the Russian government to destroy them from within. Let's untether ourselves from their energy, build out our nuclear plants, drilling, and natural gas exploration to fill our needs. And if we reduce our dependence on them, the system that they have just quite simply isn't sustainable. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. The last video is going to be on the issue of morality. You'll see where Jordan Peterson makes a defense of what seems like Russia's morality and some pretty hard critiques about our own. Obviously see the world from a different point of view, but either way, join us. I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.